The sky above the village was always quiet and blue and peaceful, but deep in the woods something had changed. The animals knew it first because they stopped coming near the trees. Birds flew in wide circles and refused to land. The small four-legged grazers trembled and ran the other way. Then the livestock began to vanish without a sound. One goat disappeared from behind a locked gate. A fat feather beast vanished, even though it had been tied up with thick rope. Next, a hunter went into the woods and never came back. Then another followed and also vanished. The third hunter returned with eyes wide and blood on his clothes. He said he had seen something tall and dark, something that moved between the trees without making a sound, something with eyes like silver fire. The villagers gathered in the square and listened as the elders spoke. Their voices were low and nervous. They spoke of old stories from before the humans came. Stories about silent killers, creatures made for hunting, beasts from the stars that left no tracks and no mercy. But these were only stories, the young ones said. Until now, at night the wind began to sound strange. Not like the normal wind that blew through the trees, but like a voice, a whisper. The children cried, and the parents checked every door and window twice. Even the brave warriors who kept watch by the fire no longer joked. They looked into the darkness with wide eyes. One of them swore he saw something watching from the edge of the trees. Tall and still, too still, like it was not breathing at all. One morning, just before sunrise, the baker's boy went to gather wood. He dropped his bundle and ran back screaming. Everyone rushed to see what he found. There on the soft earth were tracks, but not like anything they knew. Long, deep claw marks like knives had raked the ground. The prints were too big, too heavy. The steps were slow and careful, and they were heading toward the center of the village. Panic spread like fire. Mothers pulled their children inside. Doors slammed shut, shutters locked. The market was empty before the sun rose. Even the elders stayed indoors, their faces pale. They whispered among themselves in fear. "It's only a matter of time now," they said. "It will come, and when it does, we will not be ready." The village fell silent. Even the animals hid. The wind was cold and sharp, and no one spoke above a whisper. Guards were posted at every corner, but even they seemed unsure. Their hands shook. Their weapons felt too small. And yet, as the village crouched in fear, one small figure stood alone in the open. A little girl with messy hair and a dirty face. She stood in the middle of the empty square with a soft giggle in her voice. She was not from this world. She was human, the only child of her kind in the village, born from the crash of a ship many seasons ago. Her name was Mira. The villagers had raised her after her parents died in a storm. They taught her their ways, their words, their foods and stories. But Mira was still human, and humans were strange. She never feared the woods. She liked the way the leaves moved in the wind. She liked the sound of sticks cracking under her feet. She laughed at things the others feared. She played in the rain and climbed trees too high. And she always smiled. Even now, as the villagers watched from behind closed windows, Mira stood with a small cloth in her hands. Inside were sweet things, cookies made from nut flour and honey fruit. She had made them with the old baker the day before. She set the cloth down carefully on the stone steps near the big fire bowl. Then she sat next to it, swinging her legs and humming a soft tune. Some of the villagers gasped. Others whispered her name. "What is she doing?" they said. "Why is she out there? She will be taken. She will be eaten. Someone must stop her." But no one moved. Behind the trees, just beyond the edge of sight, something watched. It had been waiting, studying, learning. It had come to this planet by accident. A broken ship, a failed mission, left alone, wounded, hungry. At first it hunted to survive. Then it hunted because that was all it knew. But now, something was different. The creature stood tall and still between the trees. Its body was wrapped in dark metal skin, its face hidden behind a mask that glowed softly in the night. It had claws like blades and eyes that scanned heat and sound. But this child, this tiny soft thing, was not hiding. She was not running. She was smiling. The creature tilted its head, confused. The child reached into the cloth and took out a cookie. She held it up high like an offering. Then she giggled, her voice light and bright like birdsong. "You look hungry," she said. "I brought these just for you." The wind stopped. The trees went still. The village held its breath. The creature stepped forward once, then again, its heavy feet silent on the soft earth, its eyes fixed on the child, its body ready to strike. Yet it did not. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. Mira smiled again and set the cookie down beside her. She did not run. She did not scream. She only waited, and somewhere deep inside the creature, something shifted. Not pain, not hunger, not rage. Something else. Something forgotten. Something small. Something warm. It stepped closer, and the village watched, not knowing what would come next. Long before the shadow came to the village, long before the silence in the woods, there was another kind of arrival, something that also came from the sky, but not to bring fear, not to bring death. A small ship had fallen from the stars, crashing through clouds like a broken bird, fire trailing behind it. As it tumbled from the sky, it landed in the hills far from the village with a great roar that shook the ground for miles. Smoke rose for 3 days and nights, and the villagers gathered with fear in their eyes, but also with wonder. They had never seen such a craft before, not this small, not this strange, not this fragile. Inside they found 2 humans, a man and a woman, both badly hurt, but alive. The villagers had never seen humans up close before, only in the far-off trade stations or the silent recordings left behind by other travelers. But these 2 were real, warm, bleeding, breathing. The villagers helped them, carried them, treated their wounds, and gave them shelter. The humans spoke a different tongue at first, but kindness needs no language. They worked to repay their debt. They helped in the fields, fixed broken tools, taught the villagers strange new ways of growing food and making light in the dark. They were builders and healers and dreamers. The villagers began to like them, then trust them, then love them. In time, the humans had a child, a daughter born under the wide twin moons with eyes like the ocean and hair like flame. They named her Mira, and the village cheered her birth as if she was one of their own. Mira grew fast. She ran before she walked. She climbed before she crawled. She laughed more than she cried. She was different from the village children in many ways, but no one seemed to mind. The elders said she had the fire of her kind, but the heart of theirs. She learned both languages, both ways of life. She helped the cooks. She helped the hunters. She asked too many questions and always wanted to see what was behind the next hill. She called everyone by name and knew every beast by sound. But then came the storm. It was a black storm, a skybreaker, a wrath wind, the kind that comes only once in 100 seasons. The parents had gone to the far lake to trade fish and never returned. The villagers found what was left of their boat days later, broken and washed up on the rocks. Mira was only 6. She did not cry that night or the next after that. She sat outside their old hut with a small light in her hand and stared at the stars, waiting. The villagers took her in fully, then, not just as guests, not just as friends, but as family. Each house offered something. The baker gave her warm bread. Each morning the builder taught her to shape stone. The old singer sang her songs until she slept. Mira grew with a village of parents, a world of protectors. But she never forgot the stars, and she never forgot the silence that followed the storm. Years passed, and Mira remained the same, in many ways still curious, still brave, still filled with strange human kindness that made her different. She would walk alone into the woods when no one dared follow. She would bring small gifts to the edge of the trees, pieces of fruit, shiny stones, scraps of bread. She believed the forest was not evil, only misunderstood. When the whispering began, when the hunters vanished, when the fear returned, Mira noticed too. She saw the way the warriors stood still too long, how the elders spoke in quiet tones. She heard the warnings, she saw the fear in their eyes. But she also saw the woods, and something deep in her heart said that it was not only danger there. It was something else, something lonely. So she did what felt right to her. She went into the kitchen with the old baker and made cookies, the kind with honey, fruit, and soft spice, the kind her father used to make when the stars were clear and the night was gentle. She carried them in a cloth and walked to the square. She waited, and something watched. The days after that first meeting were filled with silence, but not the same kind. It was a waiting silence, a wondering silence. The predator had not attacked that night. The track stopped just short of the fire bowl. The guard said they heard something move away, not toward. The villagers began to whisper again, but this time in confusion, not just fear. And Mira went back to the square the next night and the one after that. Each time she sat in the same spot, placed a cookie on the ground, and smiled. Sometimes the cookie vanished before morning. Sometimes it did not. But she never missed a night. The villagers did not know what to think. Some said she was mad. Others said she was blessed. A few believed she had made a deal with the beast. But no one stopped her. One night, the warrior chief approached her quietly and sat beside her. He asked her what she was doing, and she answered simply, "I think it is hungry, and I think it is lonely, and I think it does not want to hurt us." The warrior said nothing more and left her in the dark with the stars above. In the woods, the creature watched. It did not understand the child. It did not understand her actions. It had known war and pain and silence. But not laughter, not kindness, not cookies. It had scanned her many times, looked for threats, searched for weapons, found none. Her body was soft, her hands were small, her voice held no fear. And that confused it more than any blade ever could. It had killed before, it had hunted many worlds, it had fought in wars without names. But now it stood still just outside the village night after night, and watched, and wondered, and waited. The wind was quiet that night, not cold, not warm, just quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like the world is holding its breath. The stars above blinked softly behind a thin layer of clouds, and the village below was dark, every window shuttered, every door sealed, every lantern snuffed out, except for one small light near the fire bowl in the center of the square. Mira sat cross-legged on the stone, her red scarf wrapped around her shoulders, and her small cloth bundle resting in her lap. Her legs swung gently back and forth as she hummed a soft tune. She had no fear, no worry, just her song and her cookies. Tonight she had made for the baker, had given her new spice to try, and she was proud of the smell. They carried sweet and warm, like something safe, like something from a place far away. She laid one on the edge of the stone and leaned back on her hands, looking toward the trees. The villagers watched from cracks in their doors, from corners of their windows, from behind curtains that barely moved, their eyes wide, their breath shallow. They saw nothing, but they felt it. Something was there. It was closer than ever before. Not a shadow, not a whisper, but a presence. It stood just beyond the circle of the fire bowl, just beyond the edge of the trees, just beyond the reach of sight, but not beyond the reach of fear. The warriors on the roof held their breath, their hands tight on spears made of bone, and metal, their feet frozen, as if the air itself had turned to stone. Then the sound came. Not a growl, not a roar, not a voice. A step, heavy and careful. Another step, then another. And then it came into view. Not fully, just enough. Enough to see the tall figure with armor dark as night and claws like broken glass, enough to see the faint light behind its mask glowing like twin stars, enough to see the way it moved like it belonged to the forest and the shadows. Mira smiled. She picked up the cookie and stood holding it in both hands like a treasure. "You came," she said, her voice soft but clear. "I made these for you." The creature did not move. Its head tilted slightly, not like an animal, more like a machine, tried to understand a code it had never seen before. Mira stepped forward one pace, then another, slowly, carefully, never looking away, her feet bare, her scarf dancing in the breeze. "I think you're lonely," she said. "I think you are hungry too, and maybe sad." The creature lowered its head a little, not a sign of threat, not a challenge, just motion, slow and measured. It had never heard this voice before, not in war, not in silence. She was not shouting, not running, not shaking. She was offering. It had seen humans before in battles, on broken moons, in cities that burnt. But never like this. Never so small, never so gentle, never so still. Mira reached the edge of the firelight and stopped. She bent down and placed the cookie on a flat stone, then stepped back 3 paces and sat down cross-legged once more. She waited. The wind moved again, gently, softly, carrying the scent of the cookie toward the dark edge of the trees. The creature stepped forward, one slow motion at a time. Its armor caught the light from the firebowl for a second, and the villagers saw the marks across its chest, deep scars from weapons long past. It moved closer until it stood over the cookie, its head low, its eyes on the child. Mira did not blink. She looked up at it like she were a tree or a cloud, something big, but not scary, something curious, not cruel. The creature crouched slowly, its joints clicking softly as it lowered itself down, its claws hovered over the stone. Then it picked up the cookie. It turned it in its hand, sniffed it once, then again, then slowly, carefully brought it to the place on its helmet where a mouth might be. There was a hiss, a small release of pressure, and a panel on the mask slid open, just a little, not enough to see anything inside, just enough to take in the cookie. It vanished into the gap, and there was silence. Mira smiled again. That one had spice, she said. Not too much, just a little is my favorite. The creature did not move, not at first, not for many breaths. Then it stood and looked down at her, its body tall, and still like a statue with eyes that held something no one could name. Then it turned and walked back into the trees. No sound, no rush, just silence. The villagers stared, unable to speak, unable to believe what they had just seen. A hunter, a killer, a predator had come into their heart and taken not blood, not life, but a cookie. Mira remained sitting, her hands in her lap, her eyes on the place where the trees had swallowed the figure. "Thank you," she whispered, and the wind carried it into the leaves. That night nothing was taken. No animal was lost, no hunter vanished, no scream echoed in the dark. The village slept in silence, and Mira slept in peace. She dreamed of stars and cookies and tall shapes watching over her like giants in the night. And deep in the woods the creature sat beside a cold stream, its hands resting on its knees, its head tilted up toward the sky. It had tasted many things before, but never this. Not the flavor, the moment. It had felt something strange in its chest, something warm, something slow, something new. It had looked into the eyes of a child and seen no fear. And now it could not forget. Long before it saw the child, long before it tasted the strange sweetness of that soft gift, long before it stood in the firelight of a quiet village, it had another name, not a spoken name, not one given by a mother or a friend, but a number burned into steel, a code, etched in a bone, a call, known only in war. It was created, not born, grown, not raised, shaped by machines, not by hands. Its first memory was light, bright, and sharp like knives. Its second was pain. Its third was silence. They taught it to hunt before it could walk, taught it to shoot before it could think, taught it to survive without comfort, without kindness, without rest. It learned how to move without sound, how to see in darkness, how to breathe without air, how to kill without emotion. Its world was made of metal and command, of drills and blood, of missions and victories and loss. There was no laughter, no stories, no games, no music. Only survival, only orders, only war. It was part of a unit, one of many, all trained the same, all armed the same, all taught never to question, never to doubt, never to feel. Its body was strong, faster than any native beast, its armor fused with its skin, its nerves linked to scanners and weapons and systems. Its mind was focused, always watching, always calculating. Its heart was quiet. Then came the great battle, the mission with no return. A forgotten world, a failed command, a ship brought down by fire from the sky. The others died, some quickly, some not. It crawled from the wreck with half its systems broken, its orders erased, its purpose gone. It walked for days through mud and storm and ash until it found a place to hide, not to wait for rescue, because it knew no one would come, not to regroup, because there was no one left. It hid because it did not know what else to do. For the first time, it was alone, truly alone. No voices in its ear, no commands in its mind. Just silence. And it hated the silence. So it hunted. At first it hunted for food, then it hunted for control, then it hunted because it had always hunted and did not know how to stop. The creatures here were easy to track, slow, soft, trusting. It did not kill them all, just enough to survive, just enough to remember who it was. Then it found the village. Strange beings, not human, not machine, not soldiers. They lived, simply planted crops, raised animals, sang songs by fires, played games with children. It watched them. It planned their destruction out of habit. It marked their defenses weak, their guards foolish, their walls useless. But it did not strike. Not once. Something felt different. It could not explain it, but something about the way they laughed together, the way they shared food, the way they looked up at the sky without fear. It confused the hunter. Then it saw the child, the small human with wild hair and bright eyes. She was not like the soldiers it had killed, not like the scientists it had hunted, not like the prisoners it had ignored. She smiled, not out of madness, not out of victory, but out of something pure, something warm. She was not afraid. Even when the wind changed, even when the shadows moved, she stayed. She baked cookies. She sat in the open. She waited for it. And when it came, she offered not a weapon, not a scream, not a trap. She offered sweetness. The cookie was warm, filled with spice, and something soft and sticky. The taste lingered longer than any ration. The smell stayed in its helmet long after it walked away. But the taste was not what mattered. It was the way it was given. No trick, no demand, just a gift. The first gift it had ever received. It did not know what to do with that feeling. So it watched her again the next night, and the next, and the next. Each time she brought a new cookie, each time she smiled, each time she spoke. The words meant little at first, just sounds, but the tone was soft like falling rain, like leaves and wind, like breath. And the hunter began to listen. It recorded her voice, played it back in the dark corners of the forest, trying to understand the patterns, the meaning, the reason it made the silence feel less sharp. It watched the way her hands moved when she spoke, the way her feet danced, when she waited, the way her eyes sparkled when she laughed. No soldier ever moved like that, no general, no commander, no enemy. Only her. Something inside, the hunter, shifted like gears grinding, like ice cracking. It did not know the word for what it felt, but it knew it had not felt it before. It began to walk slower, began to breathe deeper, began to stop before striking. It passed the fields and did not take. It passed the animals and did not kill. It stood in the trees at night and simply watched the stars and wondered, what if it had never been trained? What if it had never fought? What if it had never crashed here? What if it had been something else? Something more? Each night the question grew louder, and each night the child's voice was the answer. It stopped sharpening its weapons. It stopped cleaning its claws. It began instead to clean the edges of its armor, not to prepare for war, but to remove the stains of what had come before. It found a broken mirror in the ruins of an old ship and stared at its reflection for hours. Who am I? Not a soldier, not anymore. Not a weapon, not now. Not a killer, not here. Maybe something else. Maybe something new. And always it returned to the same place. The edge of the village. The sound of her voice. The scent of a cookie. And the feeling it could not name. Not yet, but soon. Very soon. The forest had grown quiet in a new way, not with fear, not with threat, but with a gentle silence, like the world was listening, like it was waiting for something more. The villagers noticed first, without words, without plans. They noticed it in the mornings when no goats were missing, when no fences were broken, when no blood marked the trails. The warriors noticed next. They stood at their posts and waited for danger, but none came. No glowing eyes, no heavy steps, no shapes in the trees, only wind and time and peace. The elders whispered in their homes, their voices unsure, their thoughts tangled. Some believed it was a trap, some believed it was a miracle, most simply did not understand. But Mira understood. She stood each morning by the stone step and watched the cookie she had placed the night before. Sometimes it was gone, sometimes it remained untouched, but always she smiled, always she returned with more, always she hummed her soft songs into the dusk. The villagers watched her not with anger, not with scorn, but with wonder, quiet, careful wonder, as if she was something ancient, as if she held a secret they could not see. Children asked if they could help, if they could bake too, if they could leave their own gifts at the edge of the square. The baker nodded slowly, and the kitchen grew loud with tiny hands and curious hearts. A pile of sweet things grew at the center of the village, soft breads, fruit slices, honey cakes, wrapped in leaves, cookies of every kind. And still Mira sat in her place, every evening her scarf tied, tight, her eyes on the trees, her voice lifting into the sky with a song only she seemed to know. The creature came sometimes, not every night, not in plain sight, but close enough to hear, close enough to smell the warmth, close enough to feel the strange pull in its chest. It watched not like a hunter, not like a scout, but like something new, like a traveler, like a guest. It had not eaten meat in many days, had not sharpened its claws, had not run its battle checks, or counted its ammunition. Instead, it had begun to build something in the forest, a shelter simple and strange, made from metal bones and forest, which shaped in ways it did not fully understand, but that felt right. A roof that curved like the village houses, a door that opened not like a shield, but like a welcome, a space to sit, not just to hide, a place to rest, not to wait for war. The birds returned slowly, the small creatures stepped into the light. Again, the plants near the water bloomed brighter than they had in many seasons. The forest was healing. The village began to speak of other things again, trade stories, harvest dances, star-watching games under the moon. The fear that once shaped their every step began to melt like snow under sun. But not all were at peace. A group of warriors gathered in the longhouse, their faces dark, their voices low. They did not trust the silence. They did not trust the strange presence. They feared what might come when the child was not there, when the treats ran out, when the true hunger returned. They spoke of traps of fire, of blades soaked in poison. They argued over when not if the creature would turn again. One warrior older than the rest stood and said he had seen the eyes of the thing seen, something behind the metal, something not beast, not monster, but soldier, something broken, something tired, something that did not want to fight anymore. They mocked him softly and turned away. That night, Mira sat again by the stone, this time with a small fruit drink beside her, cookies stacked neatly in a leaf basket. She spoke aloud, not to the villagers, not to the stars, but to the one she knew was listening. I know you are there. I know you are not like before. I know you are more than they say. She paused, looked up toward the treetops where the branches moved just slightly. You do not have to stay hidden, not from me, not from them, not forever. A soft breeze passed through the square, carrying her words into the forest. She sat quietly for a long time, then stood and walked to the edge of the square where the shadows began and placed the basket on a smooth rock, her hands slow, her feet careful, her smile calm. Then she returned to her seat and closed her eyes and sang. The creature stepped from the trees, not all the way, just enough that the light touched the edge of its armor. The basket was in reach, its hands moved slowly, its head low as it took the gift and backed away, without sound, without rush. And the villagers saw. From behind windows, from rooftops, from corners they saw, and they did not scream, they did not run. Some held their breath, some held each other, some wept. Not from fear, but from something else, something that felt like change. The next morning the basket was left behind empty, but cleaned the rock beneath. It polished the leaf, folded neatly like a thank you in silence. Mira found it and smiled, and the old baker cried softly into her apron without knowing why. The piece continued, not loud, not perfect, but real. And in the forest the creature sat in its strange shelter and listened to the echo of the child's song in its helmet again and again and again. It had not spoken in many years, its voice lost, its words forgotten. But deep inside, something stirred, something old, something hidden. A name, perhaps not a number, not a code, but a real name waiting in the dark to be remembered. And somewhere far above, among the stars' engines, burned cold light, shimmered across black space, and something began to move. Something that would bring fire. Something that would not understand cookies. Far above the world where the village slept and the forest healed, and the child sang, there moved a shape cold and vast like a shadow across the stars, a ship, not built for peace, not shaped for kindness, not meant for anything soft or small. It moved without sound and without warning, its metal sides marked with symbols of old wars, its weapons charged, its lights red and hungry. Inside the ship men and women sat in armor, silent, focused, watching screens with cold eyes, reading signals, following coordinates, tracking something dangerous, something that had once been lost, but now was found. They called it Asset 88, a relic of war, a failed experiment, a soldier gone rogue. They said it had killed entire squads across 3 moons, burned colonies to ash, torn through tanks and mechs and outposts with no hesitation, no mercy, no reason. They said it was not a person, not even a weapon anymore, just a danger, a problem to erase. The signal had returned weak at first, then strong, a pulse sent from a distant world, the last world on the old list, the place where the ship had crashed and burned and been forgotten. But Asset 88 had survived, and now it had been found, and it had to be destroyed. The team chosen was the best, silent, fast, ruthless men and women who had no doubts, only tasks. Among them was Commander Velleman, who had trained hundreds of soldiers, who had buried even more, his voice low and sharp, his heart colder than the steel he wore. He read the reports again. Scans showed a settlement, small, low-tech, primitive, some alien species, not flagged as hostile, one human signature, possibly a child. The team asked if the child mattered. Bell said no. Their goal was the target and nothing else. They entered the atmosphere like a falling blade, cutting the clouds with fire. The ship shook the sky and made the mountains echo. The villagers ran from their homes, their eyes wide, their voices filled with fear. They had never seen such a machine, such a beast of metal and fire. They hid behind walls and rocks. They held their children close. They looked to the elders, but the elders had no answers. Mira stood at the edge of the square, her eyes on the sky, her heart tight, not with fear, but with something deeper, something she could not name. The ship landed near the edge of the forest, its legs crushing trees, its engines burning the grass to smoke. The ramp dropped with a hiss, and the soldiers marched out, weapons raised, armor, gleaming helmets, cold and blank. They scanned the area, then moved toward the village in silence. The creature watched from the trees, its body still, its breath low, its sensors glowing as it read the signals, felt the frequencies, recognized the threat. They had come for it. They had found it, and they would kill everything to reach it. It moved through the forest like wind, like shadow, like memory, slipping past branches and stone, moving not as a monster, not as a hunter, but as something else, something older, something sharper. Mira stood in the path of the soldiers, her hands raised, her voice strong. She told them there was no danger. She told them to leave. She told them the thing they hunted was not what they thought. Vel looked at her, through his visor, his face unreadable, his voice without feeling. He said, "Move, child, we are not here for you." She said, "I will not move." He said, "Then you are in the way," and lifted his weapon. A sound broke through the trees, not a roar, not a growl, but a pulse, a wave of energy that cracked the earth and made the sky tremble. From the shadows came the creature, armor shining in the light, claws out, blades, drawn eyes like burning silver. But it did not strike. It stood between the child and the soldiers, its body wide, its arms spread. It had made a choice. Vel ordered fire. The first shots bounced off its chest, the second off its arms, the third hit the ground as the creature leapt forward, moving faster than sight, a blur of power and fury. The soldiers screamed, but the sound was lost in the chaos, the forest lit with fire and sparks and steel. Mira ran to the side, her voice lost, her heart in her throat. The villagers watched from the edges, helpless, afraid, unsure of what to do. But some moved toward her, some pulled her back, some held her close and kept her safe. The battle was fast and violent, but not cruel. The creature did not kill to destroy, it killed to protect, it killed to defend, it killed not like a weapon, but like a guardian. One by one, the soldiers fell, some thrown, some broken, some simply dropped, as if the air had vanished from their lungs. Only Vel remained, his armor, cracked, his weapon, sparking, his eyes wide with rage. He shouted something and charged. The creature caught him with one hand, lifted him from the ground, and looked into his face. There was no hate. There was no roar. There was only silence. Then it turned and threw the commander into the wreck of the ship, the impact shaking the trees and ending the fight. The ship burned behind them, the smoke rising into the sky like a question without answer. The creature turned back to the village, its body damaged, its light dim, its hands shaking. Mira broke free from the arms that held her and ran to it, her feet bare, her voice trembling. She reached up and touched its hand and said, "Thank you." The creature fell to one knee, its breath heavy, its armor broken, but its eyes calm. The villager stepped forward slowly, not with fear, not with weapons, but with open hands and quiet words. The war had come, and the war had passed, and peace had chosen to stay. And far above, the stars blinked, silently watching as the world below changed forever. The The wind was gentle as it moved through the tall grass near the forest edge, carrying with it the smell of ash and earth and the soft sounds of a village waking up again. Smoke still rose from the broken machine that had come from the sky, its metal torn and scattered like bones left behind after a hunt, but the danger was gone, and silence no longer felt like fear. The people of the village stepped from their homes slowly, at first with caution in their hearts and worry in their eyes. But when they saw the creature still kneeling near the square, they felt something change inside them. It was no longer just a shadow or a story or a nightmare walking through trees. It was something real, something wounded, something that had chosen not to destroy. The human child Mira stood beside it, her hand resting on its large arm, her small voice whispering words that no one else could hear, words that made the creature's head lower and its glow soften. The elders gathered again, but this time their voices were not whispers of warning. They spoke with wonder and thought and even respect. Some still feared it for what it had done, for what it could do again, if it chose to, but most now saw what the child had seen from the start. A protector, not a predator. The healer came forward, next not with tools or weapons, but with herbs and cloth and soft speech. She stood before the creature and waited until it looked at her, then slowly stepped closer, her hands open. It did not move to stop her. It only watched as she placed a wrap around a cracked plate on its side and laid a balm on a burn across its arm or fingers, gentle, her eyes steady. Other villagers followed, bringing water and food, not because they thought it needed those things, but because it felt right to share. One of the older hunters placed a carved stone beside it, a symbol of welcome and peace, something passed from one warrior to another long ago. The creature said nothing, made no sound, but slowly it stood, not to threaten, not to leave, just to show that it could still move, still choose. It looked around the village, and then to the forest, and finally to Mira. The girl smiled and took its hand again and pointed toward the center of the village where the sun now touched the stones with warm light. The people watched as the child led the creature forward, not with chains, not with fear, but with trust. They walked together to the big circle where stories were told and songs were sung and meals were shared, and there they sat side by side. Time passed, and the sky shifted and the trees whispered with the wind. Days turned into weeks, and the village began to heal. Broken fences were fixed, animals returned, the forest quieted. And the creature stayed. It did not go back into the shadows. It did not vanish into the stars. It stayed near the village, near the child, near the people who now looked at it not with dread, but with something like pride. It helped in ways only it could. It lifted heavy logs. It watched the hills. It stood guard during storms. And when wild beasts came from the deeper woods, it faced them and drove them away without a sound. But more than that, it listened. At night it sat near the fires while children played and old ones told stories, and every now and then Mira would laugh and hand it something sweet and small. Sometimes a fruit, sometimes a soft piece of bread, and once again a cookie, just like before. And every time it accepted the gift with slow hands and a silence full of meaning. One evening, when the stars were clear and the moon was full, a ship came again, not loud, not burning, but slow and careful. This one was different, small, clean, a scout, not a weapon. A man stepped from it, his suit marked with symbols of peace, his hands empty, his eyes tired. He came to speak to the creature, to ask what it wanted to know, if it would return, if it would come back to the place that made it. The creature looked at him for a long moment, then at the village, then at the girl. And it shook its head once. The man nodded, said he understood, and left without anger, without force, without a single raised voice. The ship vanished and was never seen again. Years passed. Mira grew older, stronger, wiser, and always the creature was near like a shadow, without fear, like a guardian without chains. They became legend together, the girl and the beast who had once come to kill, but had stayed to protect. Other villages heard the story. Some came to see, some came to test, some came to learn. And through it all the creature remained silent, but present and always ready. It became part of the village, part of the land, part of the story, passed from voice to voice, from one fire to another. No one ever knew what it truly was, not even Mira, not the elders, not the ones who brought books and machines and questions. But they knew what it became. A protector, a friend, a lesson written not in war, but in peace. in one moment of kindness from a child who did not know fear. And a cookie,